Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. In January 2023, I visited the island of Kennewan in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. During my trip, I made over 1,100 QSOs with ham radio operators around the globe and was the first to activate St. Vincent for Parks on the Air. This is my story of how I planned and executed this trip and how you might also. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a country consisting of multiple islands in the South Caribbean. It's inhabited by about 105,000 people. Of the 340 DXCC countries, Club Log places St. Vincent at the 121st most wanted. So, while not terribly rare, St. Vincent is still very much in demand by DXers. Parks on the Air has identified over 17 national parks or protected areas throughout the country, none of which has been activated prior to January 2023. The beach you're now looking at is on the windward side of Kennewan on the upper side of the island. I had hoped to operate directly from my hotel room, but issues with the antenna and noise made that option less than ideal. After exploring other options, I was led to a perfect location on the north side of the beach and just a short walk from the hotel. This would end up being my primary operating location for my week in Kennewan. As a bonus, this spot is also within the boundaries of Parks on the Air Park J8NKI, the Kennewan Marine Reserve. From this bit of land, my DX Commander expedition will have a clear shot to the U.S. just to the left of the distant peak, west toward Europe and Africa, and south toward South America. Since I'm a distance from the hotel with only an abandoned restaurant above me on the hill, I had permission to leave the antenna up, although I also dropped it fully intact on the ground when the winds were high. This is only the second time I've built my new DX Commander expedition. The first was in the cold weather of Maine. I was familiar with how it all went together, but had not yet tuned the elements. I brought a small SWR meter to help with that process. I set up the vertical for 10, 15, 20, and 40 meters. The complete build took about 15 to 20 minutes. Tuning added another 10 to 15, but I was happy to do it in 80 degrees versus the freezing temps back in Maine. Although all my gear came to Kennewan in Pelican Air travel cases, I also brought along the backpack I use for all of my POTA activations. It holds my Kenwood TS480HX, an MFJ auto tuner, a 160 watt-hour battery that is within the airline travel regulations, a Heil BM17 lightweight headset, an external speaker, and my logging laptop. I'm very familiar with this setup drill from all of my park activations back home.
India, Juliet 8, November CQ, calling CQ, Parks in the Air, Juliet 8, November Kilo India, Juliet 8, November Kilo India.
This was my last activation on January 20th. I was only on air for about 30 minutes, but it was a nice run to get more US calls in my log. My first contact, NE1D, spotted me, and the second call was the POTA K1 region coordinator, K1KL Kevin Lyons. I made 29 contacts total in this quick activation before packing up for the round trip home.
Echo 1, 5x9. Roger, I copy the Mike Alpha. I'm at Park J80002. If you have an opportunity to spot me, I'll quote it. Kilo 1, Kilo Lehman. Hi Kevin, how are you? You're 5x9. Thank you much, the park. You should probably have it. It's J80002. Thank you, 73.
Upon arrival at the hotel, I'd managed to put up the buddy pole vertical in the dark in front of our room and use my lithium battery since I had forgotten my power supply cord back at home. The noise level was high, but I was anxious to make calls, and I put 12 in the log just to make sure all the gear was working. The next day, January 15th, I set up the DX Commander expedition in the same spot you see in this video and operated from 1800 Zulu to 2020 Zulu, and then again in the dark from 2300 Zulu to 2359. The total 24-hour period netted 192 contacts around the world. Notable calls were Australia, Indonesia, Mali, and Saudi Arabia. On Zulu Day, January 16th, I continued to operate on 20 meters in the dark, adding some additional QSOs, then resumed the next morning for a short run with a buddy pole at the hotel, and returned to the DX Commander for a solid afternoon run from 1800 to 2030 Zulu. That last run was assisted greatly by my first contacts with husband-wife team Diane and John Martin, KO4 FHS and KN4 SWS, who found me and then spotted me on POTA. Much thanks to them. Total for the day was 300 contacts. I had very good success with Europe, US, and Canada east of the Mississippi, and managed to get KH6WI, my friend Eric Olson, in the log from Hawaii. January 17th was another good day with 232 in the log. Again, I stuck with 20 meters and operated from 1700 to 1830 Zulu, and returned in the dark for a late run from 2300 to 2359 Zulu. It was another strong day in Europe. I broke through the invisible line in the US and made more QSOs out west, added Alaska, and my big one of the day, 2 stations in Japan. My friend Rob Farquhar, WC1N, got me started with one of my first contacts of the day and a spot on the POTA spotting page. January 18th started with some late night contacts after 00 Zulu, but the real push was on both 15 and 20 meters from 1600 to 1930 Zulu. I had realized that I was close to doing 1,000 contacts from this location, Park Juliet 8 0002, and decided I'd just get it done today. I ended the day with another 303 contacts, including my fellow Caribbean activator Chris Billings, 8 Papa 9 Charlie Bravo, in Barbados. I also got Jason Johnson, the president and founder of Parks on the Air, in the log, W3AAX. On January 19th, my wife and I chartered a catamaran to celebrate her birthday on the water, and I brought my gear for a quick activation of the Tobago Keys Marine Park Juliet 8 0016. This one was a real adventure, with the crew taking me ashore with their dinghy. They had kindly found me an island with some shade, but the beach was narrow, making for a tricky setup. I made 70 contacts and called it quits before the shifting sands took down my radials again, or the seawater reached my radio. It was all great fun and an experience I won't forget. Which brings me back to the short activation you're seeing here, 29 QSOs, bringing the week's total to 1,122 total QSOs, all on 20 or 15 meters. Amateur radio licenses in St. Vincent are authorized by the National Telecommunication Regulatory Commission. They will consider issuing a reciprocal, temporary call sign after you complete an application and submit a small fee. In my case, I started the process with a request directly to the director of the NTRC, Apollo Knights, and continued follow-up communication directly with him. My experience with Apollo was that he was very responsive and accommodating, but the wheels in St. Vincent still turn slowly. When I first applied for my license before my May 2022 trip, I only received a verbal confirmation from my call sign, and only because I called, one day before I traveled. The actual paperwork arrived just after I landed in St. Vincent. So don't cut it close. Start early, be respectful, and don't be afraid to write or call to politely move the process forward. My temporary license, Juliet 8 November Kilo India, was assigned for a 1-year period. If you've been activating POTA parks or participated in an ARRL field day, you already have a place to start. The difference with a trip like this is to plan for the unexpected, have some redundancy, but still be very mindful of total weight. In my case, I narrowed my gear down to the following checklists. The Kenwood TS480HX has proven reliable on nearly 100 portable ops, and I appreciated the 200 watts. I decided to bring 3 antenna options so I could respond to various situations: a buddy pole, the DX Commander Expedition, and an end-fed sloper. Some people prefer to carry the radio on the plane, and I totally respect their decision. There's nothing like that peace of mind. In my case, I knew I had a lot of sensitive gear, and I couldn't carry it all aboard, so I opted to take precautions by purchasing rugged, padded cases that would make the trip and keep the gear safe. I ended up with 2 Pelican Air cases that are the exact maximum dimensions for checked luggage. I ordered one with foam that I could cut out to protect my most sensitive radio gear, and the other open with some mesh holders. I used some foam I had kicking around my house to keep the gear from rattling around. In each case, I included a statement of what the gear was to be used for, an equipment checklist, and both my U.S. and St. Vincent amateur radio licenses. There is more than gear that needs to be prepped. Some of that prep includes changing your call sign in Parks on the Air so that it properly reflects your temporary call sign or prefix suffix. Set up a secondary QRZ page with your temporary call sign and add whatever text and photos that would be helpful for those hams that have set up their logging programs to automatically look at QRZ. If you use Logbook of the World, get a call sign certificate early and set up your new call. All of these steps will help the hunters while also allowing you to promptly upload your logs. In my case, many operators used my name in their exchanges, telling me that they were looking at QRZ. I also made a point to upload my POTA logs at the end of every day so that hunters could see their results immediately. My only regret was not having Logbook of the World set up. I hadn't fully considered how many people were chasing me just for the DX country. Unless you've been to the same location before, it probably will not go as expected. Be open to the plan shifting and be prepared for the shift. In my case, since my hotel was located within the boundaries of Juliet 80002, I hoped to operate from my hotel room. By doing so, I could use my power supply and have maximum flexibility to operate at different times of day. I soon ran into two problems. First, I was only able to set up a buddy pole vertical, otherwise known as a bent dipole, so as not to disturb other guests. The long wire and tall DX Commander Expedition were just out of the question. Second, QRM was at an S5 level and just got worse as the day progressed. I was able to work through the noise, but none of this was ideal. I had already considered a plan B. I had scoped out a nearby beach adjacent to a golf course that seemed ideal. It was still within the park, was a short golf cart ride from the hotel, and I envisioned setting up the DX Commander for the week. That idea was quickly nixed when I learned the property general manager would not be inclined to let me affect her golfer's view. But I had made friends with the security director at the hotel property, and he had an idea. A short walk down the beach, there was a rocky point and a small elevated clearing. Since he was responsible for this bit of land, he'd okayed it, and a bonus, I could leave the DX Commander Expedition up. That location ended up being my prime operating spot for the week. Many POTA activators know to thoroughly research parks well before a trip. Traveling to a foreign country, especially an island country, makes doing this research an absolute prerequisite. If you arrive with a general sense of the park boundaries and how you can get in and where you can set up, you will also be best ready when you need to find a plan B or C or D. For example, I activated Tobago Keys Juliet 80016 while in St. Vincent. I was laser focused on the island grouping that are the primary epicenter of the Tobago Keys Marine Park. So, when our chartered boat first stopped at the island of Meru, all I could think of was my plan. What I didn't know until later was that Meru was also part of the park, and setting up there would have been exponentially easier. Hams know that every time we operate, especially portably, we will likely learn something that will make the next time better. The following is a short list of what I took with me from my St. Vincent experience. Use a checklist and check it twice. I did so, but still forgot a key electrical cord for my power supply. Luckily, my friend John Swanepoel, the hotel security director, found a match on site, but it could have been a disastrous misstep. Bring a dry bag for your sensitive gear if you intend to be in a small boat. The short dinghy ride to Jamesby Island and hopping out in the surf as the waves buffeted us against the shore had me worried about my radio. It would have been unnecessary with a dry bag. Beach locations are tricky, especially if you're there for an extended period of time. Think about unexpected waves, changing tides, and shifting sands. Band conditions will not be what you experience at your home QTH. Do some research about when bands typically open and close in your DX location. Do your best to have easy band flexibility with a right antenna or multiple antennas. Plan for the worst-case scenario when it comes to spotting. I relied heavily upon operators spotting me, but also called home for a spot from a friend. If your operating time is short, you want to get something started as quickly as possible. Practice and improve your skills at handling pileups. Parks on the Air activators and contesters are generally used to working through a pileup. Being at a DX location with good band conditions will attract many callers. Staying calm, maintaining a rhythm and expectation, and doing your best to hear at least call sign fragments will help you stay on top of the pileup and give more people the QSO. And don't get negative. Lithium batteries are tough to travel with because of air travel regulations, but having one can save the day if you're forced to move away from the grid. Get the word out. If it's a DX location, let Bernie, W3UR, know about your trip. He'll likely include it in his daily DX news. Also, keep people informed via your social media accounts. If you're activating a Parks on the Air park, introduce yourself to the mapping coordinator. You might need their help, and you'll be better off if they know you're making the trip. I'm sure there's more, but that's the list that comes to mind. On a final note, have a QSL plan. If you're in a DX location, there will be people that want paper. It's best not to keep them waiting, so order your paper cards as soon as possible. In my case, if you'd like a card, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to my W1DED address in QRZ, and I'll get one out to you promptly. What I've been talking about is a casual vacation activation. I wasn't doing it for the contest win and had no intention of making a dedicated all-band attempt. It's always good to remember to have fun and that you have a spouse or family that you should be spending time with. In my experience, hams will appreciate the contact, but also respect your time to do other things. Thanks for joining me virtually on my recent trip to Kennewan Island in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is K.Thomas, W1DED, operating as J8NKI in January 2023.